My name is Emma Carter, and for most of my life, I believed that success had a very specific look. At least, that's what my family taught me. In our world, success meant expensive degrees, prestigious careers, luxury homes, and impressive job titles. Before we begin, if you enjoy emotional family dramas, powerful karma stories, and inspiring life lessons, don't forget to subscribe to Quiet Karma Stories and join our growing community. Your support helps bring more unforgettable stories like this one to life. My parents were well known in our city. My father owned a successful investment firm. My mother served on charity boards and attended exclusive social events. Appearances mattered to them. A lot. My older brother, Michael, was a respected surgeon. My younger sister, Rebecca, was a corporate attorney working for one of the largest law firms in the state. At family gatherings, conversations revolved around promotions, investments, and professional achievements. Everyone seemed to be competing to prove they were the most successful person in the room. And then there was me. Unlike the rest of my family, I never cared much about status. I cared about people. That difference changed my life the day I met Daniel Harper. I was 24 years old when we first crossed paths. It happened at a local farmer's market. I had stopped to buy fresh vegetables when I noticed a man helping an elderly customer carry several heavy bags to her car. He wasn't doing it for money. He wasn't doing it for attention. He simply saw someone who needed help. That was Daniel. Kind. Honest. Hardworking. The kind of person who made everyone around him feel comfortable. Over the next several months, we got to know each other. I learned that Daniel owned a small tomato farm just outside town. He worked long hours every day. Rain or shine. Summer heat or freezing temperatures. While other people were sleeping, Daniel was already working in his fields. The more I learned about him, the more I admired him. He wasn't wealthy. He wasn't famous. But he possessed something far more valuable. Character. 2 years later, we got married. I was happier than I had ever been. Unfortunately, my family felt very differently. The criticism began almost immediately. At first, it was subtle. Small comments. Passive-aggressive jokes. Backhanded compliments. Then it became impossible to ignore. One Sunday afternoon, we attended a family dinner at my parents' house. Everything seemed normal until my mother asked Daniel about his work. "So, Daniel," she said while sipping her wine, "how are the tomatoes doing this year?" The table erupted with laughter. Daniel smiled politely. "They're doing well, thank you." My brother smirked. "Still growing vegetables?" More laughter. I felt my face burn. Daniel remained calm. "Yes." My mother shook her head dramatically. Then she looked directly at me. The smile on her face wasn't kind. It was judgmental. Almost embarrassed. And then she said the words I would never forget. "You married a man who grows tomatoes." The room went silent. Everyone waited for a reaction. I felt anger rising inside me. But before I could respond, Daniel gently placed his hand over mine beneath the table. A silent reminder to stay calm. My mother continued. "Emma, you had so much potential." My sister nodded. "You could have married a doctor." My brother laughed. "Or at least someone with a real business." The comments continued throughout the evening. Each one sharper than the last. Each one designed to make Daniel feel smaller. But Daniel never argued. Never raised his voice. Never defended himself. He simply smiled and remained respectful. That almost seemed to frustrate them more. On the drive home, I finally couldn't take it anymore. "I'm so sorry," I said. Daniel kept his eyes on the road. "For what?" The way they treat you. He smiled softly. Then he said something I would remember for years. People who judge others usually reveal more about themselves than the person they're judging. At the time, I didn't fully understand what he meant. But eventually, I would. Because while my family spent years looking down on Daniel, Daniel was quietly building something none of them could see. And one day, the same people who called him the family embarrassment would discover just how wrong they had been. The first year after our wedding wasn't easy. I had expected some resistance from my family. What I hadn't expected was how determined they seemed to be to push Daniel out of their lives. At first, it happened in small ways. Family dinners were suddenly scheduled without telling us. Weekend gatherings somehow took place when we weren't available. Birthday celebrations became last-minute announcements. Every time I questioned it, there was always an excuse. We forgot. It was spontaneous. It wasn't a big event. For a while, I tried to believe them. Daniel never did. But he never complained either. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset over the tomato fields, I asked him a question. "Does it bother you?" Daniel looked at me. "What?" "The way they treat you." He smiled softly. "Of course it does." I wasn't expecting that answer. But I don't let it control my life. I looked down. "I wish they would just give you a chance." Daniel squeezed my hand. "The people who matter already have." At the time, I thought he was talking about me. Years later, I realized he was talking about something much bigger. As time passed, the distance between us and my family continued growing. Christmas. Birthdays. Family vacations. Anniversaries. Somehow, Daniel and I always seemed to be left out. My parents never said it directly. But their message was clear. We weren't the kind of family members they wanted to show off. My brother was a surgeon. My sister was a corporate lawyer. Daniel grew tomatoes. To them, that was the entire story. 7 months later, my parents planned a luxury ski trip for the whole family. Or at least that's what I thought. I only discovered it after seeing photos online. My parents. My siblings. Their spouses. Even distant cousins. Everyone was there. Everyone except us. When I called my mother, she acted surprised. "Oh. You didn't know?" "No, Mom. I didn't." An awkward silence followed. Then she changed the subject. That was when I realized it wasn't an accident. It was intentional. And it hurt. But nothing compared to what happened 2 years later. Christmas had always been my favorite holiday. Growing up, our house was filled with lights, decorations, music, and laughter. No matter what disagreements existed during the year, Christmas brought everyone together. Or at least it used to. A week before Christmas, I still hadn't received any information about our annual family gathering. No invitation. No phone call. Nothing. At first, I assumed my mother was simply busy. But as Christmas Eve approached, a terrible feeling began growing inside me. Finally, I called my sister. "Where's Christmas dinner this year?" There was a pause. A long pause. Then she said something that made my stomach drop. "You weren't invited." For several seconds, I couldn't speak. "What?" Another uncomfortable silence. Then she quietly admitted the truth. Everyone else had already received invitations weeks earlier. Everyone. Except Daniel and me. I immediately called my mother. She answered cheerfully. "Hi, sweetheart." I skipped the small talk. "Why weren't we invited to Christmas?" The line became silent. Then I heard something unexpected. A laugh. Not a nervous laugh. Not an embarrassed laugh. A genuine laugh. My heart sank. And then she said the words that would stay with me for years. Your husband grows tomatoes. What did you expect? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. For a moment, I wondered if I had misunderstood. But she continued. We're hosting business partners. Important people. The implication was obvious. Daniel wasn't important enough. Neither was I. My eyes filled with tears. Mom. But she had already said everything she wanted to say. A few minutes later, the call ended. I sat on the couch staring at the floor. Unable to move. Unable to think. Unable to understand how my own family could be so cruel. Daniel found me there nearly an hour later. He immediately knew something was wrong. I told him everything. Every word. Every insult. Every painful detail. When I finally finished, I expected him to be angry. I expected him to be hurt. Instead, he sat beside me and wrapped an arm around my shoulders. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then he smiled. Not because it didn't hurt. Because he had already accepted something I was still learning. Emma, he said quietly. People can only make you feel inferior if you agree with them. I wiped away my tears. But they think you're a joke. Daniel looked out the window toward the fields. Rows and rows of tomato plants stretched across the property. Then he smiled again. That's okay. One day they'll realize they were laughing at the wrong person. At the time, I thought he was simply trying to comfort me. I had no idea that behind those quiet words was a future none of us could imagine. A future that would completely change everything. After the Christmas incident, something inside me changed. For years, I had hoped my family would eventually accept Daniel. I believed that if they spent enough time around him, they would see what I saw. His kindness. His integrity. His work ethic. But after hearing my mother's words, I realized something painful. They didn't want to know him. They had already decided who he was. And nothing Daniel said would change their minds. The strange thing was that Daniel never seemed interested in proving them wrong. He never complained. Never argued. Never tried to impress anyone. Instead, he focused on his farm. Every single day. While my family attended luxury events and posted vacation photos online, Daniel was waking up before sunrise. Rain. Snow. Heat waves. It didn't matter. By 5 in the morning, he was already working. Some days I would wake up and find him reviewing planting schedules at the kitchen table. Other days, he would be studying agricultural journals or watching videos about modern farming techniques. He treated farming like a science. Like an art. Like a business. One evening, I found him sitting in front of his laptop surrounded by notebooks. What are you doing? I asked. He smiled. Learning. I laughed. Learning what? How to grow more with less. That was Daniel. Always looking ahead. Always improving. Never satisfied with standing still. Over the next year, he began investing in something that many local farmers considered risky. Greenhouse technology. At the time, most farms in our area operated the traditional way. Plant. Water. Harvest. Repeat. Daniel saw an opportunity others missed. He believed modern greenhouses could dramatically increase production while reducing waste. The problem was that the technology wasn't cheap. Many people told him it was a mistake. Some even laughed. Including my family. At one dinner, my brother smirked when he heard about Daniel's plans. Now he's building fancy tomato houses. The table burst into laughter. My mother shook her head. Maybe next year he'll invent luxury tomatoes. More laughter followed. Daniel simply smiled and continued eating. As usual. On the drive home, I was furious. But Daniel wasn't. They don't understand, he said calmly. Then explain it to them. He shook his head. No. Why not? His answer was simple. Because success explains itself. Over the next several years, Daniel worked harder than anyone I had ever known. He expanded the greenhouses, improved irrigation systems, reduced waste, increased crop quality. And slowly, the results began appearing. Local restaurants started buying from him. Then specialty grocery stores. Then larger distributors. His tomatoes became known for their quality. But Daniel wasn't finished. Soon he expanded beyond tomatoes. Organic peppers, cucumbers, herbs, leafy greens. What started as a small family farm slowly transformed into something much bigger. An organic produce business. A real company. Employees were hired. New land was purchased. Additional greenhouses were built. Revenue increased every year. Meanwhile, my family remained completely unaware of what was happening. Or perhaps they simply didn't care. Whenever Daniel's name came up, the jokes continued. At family gatherings, he was still treated like an outsider. The successful surgeon. The successful lawyer. The successful executives. And Daniel. The farmer. The embarrassment. One evening, I overheard my mother speaking with a family friend. She didn't realize I was nearby. Emma could have married anyone. The woman nodded sympathetically. My mother sighed dramatically. And she chose the family embarrassment. The word stung. Even after all these years. Even after everything Daniel had accomplished. To them, he was still the man who grew tomatoes. Nothing more. That night, I told Daniel what I had heard. For the first time, I expected him to finally get angry. Maybe even hurt. Instead, he laughed. Actually laughed. I stared at him. Why is that funny? Daniel looked out the window toward the glowing greenhouses. Rows of crops stretched into the distance beneath the lights. Then he smiled. Because they're looking at the seed. He pointed toward the farm. They have no idea what it's about to become. At the time, I smiled and nodded. But I didn't fully understand. Not yet. Because while my family continued mocking the farmer they considered a failure, Daniel was quietly building something worth millions. And soon, the same people who laughed the loudest would find themselves desperately needing the man they had spent 7 years insulting. 7 years. That's how long my family spent looking down on Daniel. 7 years of jokes. 7 years of insults. 7 years of treating a hard-working, honest man as if he were somehow less valuable than everyone else. At first, I believed things would improve. I thought time would soften their opinions. I thought they would eventually recognize Daniel's character. I was wrong. If anything, the mockery became worse. Every family gathering followed the same pattern. The same people. The same conversations. The same judgment. One evening, we attended my father's birthday dinner at an upscale restaurant downtown. The table was filled with successful professionals. Doctors. Lawyers. Business executives. Investment managers. Everyone seemed eager to talk about promotions, bonuses, and expensive purchases. My brother had recently bought a vacation home. My sister had made partner at her law firm. One cousin had just invested in a luxury apartment complex. Then someone turned toward Daniel. The smile on their face wasn't friendly. "So Daniel," my cousin asked, How many tomatoes did you sell this week? Several people laughed. I felt my stomach tighten. Daniel smiled politely. A lot. More laughter. My brother leaned back in his chair. Must be exciting. My mother shook her head dramatically. I still can't believe Emma chose farming over all the opportunities she had. The table laughed again. Nobody even tried to hide it anymore. To them, Daniel wasn't a businessman. He wasn't an entrepreneur. He wasn't a provider. He was simply a farmer. And in their minds, that made him inferior. That night, I cried on the drive home. I was tired. Tired of defending him. Tired of pretending their words didn't hurt. Tired of watching the kindest man I knew get treated like a joke. I don't want to do this anymore, I said quietly. Daniel glanced over. What? My family. The words poured out. I don't want to see them anymore. I don't want to sit through another dinner. I don't want to listen to another insult. For a moment, Daniel said nothing. Then he reached over and squeezed my hand. Emma. His voice was calm. Steady. The way it always was. Let success speak for us. I looked at him. What if they never change? Daniel smiled. Then that's their loss. Those 5 words stayed with me. Because Daniel truly meant them. He wasn't trying to win their approval. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He was focused on something much bigger. Building. Growing. Creating. While my family obsessed over appearances, Daniel obsessed over improvement. And year after year, his business continued expanding. The first greenhouse became 3. Then 6. Then 12. His products appeared in premium grocery stores across the state. Restaurants proudly advertised that they used produce from Harper Farms. Major distributors began reaching out. Investors started asking questions. Agricultural magazines featured articles about his innovative growing methods. The business grew faster every year. Employees were hired. New facilities were built. Additional land was purchased. And yet Daniel remained exactly the same. Humble. Quiet. Focused. Most people would have celebrated. Daniel simply kept working. The funny thing was that my family never noticed. Or maybe they didn't want to notice. They were too busy looking at the word farmer. They never bothered looking beyond it. One Christmas, my mother introduced Daniel to one of her friends. This is my son-in-law. The woman smiled politely. What does he do? Before Daniel could answer, my mother sighed. He grows tomatoes. The way she said it made it sound like an apology. As if she were embarrassed. As if Daniel's profession somehow reflected poorly on her. I expected Daniel to react. He didn't. He simply shook the woman's hand and asked about her family. That was Daniel. Always choosing dignity over pride. Always taking the higher road. As the years passed, something unexpected began happening. The people outside our family respected Daniel more and more. Customers trusted him. Employees admired him. Business partners valued him. The only people who couldn't see his worth were the people who shared my last name. One evening, nearly 7 years after our wedding, I stood beside Daniel overlooking one of the largest greenhouse facilities on the property. The setting sun reflected across acres of glass structures. Trucks moved in and out of loading areas. Workers finished their shifts. The farm looked nothing like the small operation it had once been. It looked like an empire. I turned toward him. Do you ever wish you had proven them wrong? Daniel smiled. Then he looked across the property he had built with his own hands. I don't need to. I followed his gaze. For the first time, I understood exactly what he meant. Because success had already spoken. The only problem was that my family still wasn't listening. But very soon, they would have no choice. Because while Daniel's business was becoming worth millions, my family's carefully constructed world was beginning to fall apart. By the 8th year of our marriage, something remarkable had happened. Daniel was no longer running a small farm. He was running a company. Most people simply didn't know it yet, including my family. To them, he was still the same man they had mocked for years. The man who grew tomatoes. The man they excluded from Christmas dinners. The man they called the family embarrassment. What they failed to realize was that while they were busy protecting their image, Daniel was quietly building an empire. And it was growing faster than anyone imagined. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It happened one decision at a time. One greenhouse. One contract. One customer. One opportunity. Daniel had always believed that quality mattered more than appearances. While larger agricultural companies focused on volume, Daniel focused on excellence. His produce became known for its freshness, consistency, and superior taste. Soon, local grocery stores weren't enough. Regional supermarket chains began reaching out. I still remember the day Daniel received his first major contract. A supermarket chain with hundreds of locations wanted Harper Farms products on their shelves. The deal was worth more money than our farm had generated during its first several years combined. I expected Daniel to celebrate. Instead, he quietly reviewed the paperwork and returned to work. That was who he was. Success never changed him. It simply gave him more responsibility. The contract changed everything. Within 2 years, Harper Farms products appeared in supermarkets across the country. Trucks carrying Daniel's produce traveled hundreds of miles every day. New distribution centers opened. More employees were hired. More farmland was purchased. The company expanded faster than anyone expected. One afternoon, I walked into Daniel's office and found him studying maps. "What are you looking at?" I asked. He smiled. "Europe." I laughed. "The vacation destination." Daniel shook his head. "The market." At first, I thought he was joking. He wasn't. Several months later, Harper Farms secured its first international export agreement. Then another. And another. Soon, containers filled with organic produce were being shipped overseas. Countries that had never heard of Daniel Harper were now buying products from his company. The small tomato farm had become an international business. Yet almost nobody in my family knew. Or cared. Whenever Daniel's name came up, the jokes continued. The assumptions continued. The disrespect continued. One Thanksgiving, my brother asked Daniel the same question he had asked for years. "So, still growing tomatoes?" The table laughed. Daniel smiled politely. Among other things. Nobody bothered asking what that meant. Nobody bothered showing interest. My family had spent so many years believing they were superior that they never stopped to see what was happening right in front of them. And Daniel never corrected them. Not once. If someone assumed he was struggling, he let them. If someone underestimated him, he smiled. If someone mocked his profession, he remained silent. Not because he lacked confidence. Because he didn't need validation. One evening, I finally asked him why. "Why don't you tell them?" Daniel looked up from his desk. "Tell them what?" "How successful the company has become." He thought for a moment. Then shrugged. If they cared, they would have asked. I couldn't argue with that. Because he was right. People who genuinely respect you don't wait until you're successful to become interested in your life. They care before the success arrives. The company continued growing. Year after year. Contract after contract. Expansion after expansion. Eventually, financial analysts estimated the value of Harper Farms at several $1 million. Then several million became tens of millions. The numbers were almost impossible to believe. What began as a small tomato farm had evolved into one of the fastest-growing organic produce companies in the region. And through it all, Daniel remained exactly the same man I married. Kind. Patient. Humble. The only difference was that now he employed hundreds of people and supplied products across multiple countries. Yet my family still saw him as a joke. Still saw him as an embarrassment. Still saw him as the farmer who wasn't good enough. Sometimes I wondered what their reaction would be if they ever learned the truth. I didn't have to wonder for long. Because while Daniel's hidden empire was reaching new heights, my family's fortune was quietly beginning to collapse. And very soon, they would discover that the man they spent years mocking was the only person who could save them. For nearly a decade, my family believed they were untouchable. They had wealth, influence, connections, luxury homes, expensive cars, successful careers. From the outside, they looked like the perfect family. And they never let anyone forget it. Especially Daniel. For years, they treated him as if he were beneath them. A farmer. A man who got his hands dirty. A man they considered unworthy of their respect. But life has a way of humbling people. And when it happens, it rarely sends a warning. The first signs appeared during a family dinner. My father seemed distracted. Normally, he loved talking about business. That evening, he barely spoke. My brother looked stressed. My sister spent most of the night staring at her phone. Something felt different. When we drove home, I mentioned it to Daniel. They seemed worried. Daniel nodded. I noticed. A few months later, rumors began spreading throughout the city. Several real estate projects connected to my family's company were struggling. At first, nobody seemed concerned. Businesses faced challenges all the time. But then more stories appeared. Delayed developments. Financial losses. Investors pulling out. Construction projects being cancelled. The problems kept growing. And so did the pressure. One evening, I received a call from my sister. The moment I heard her voice, I knew something was wrong. Emma. She sounded exhausted. What happened? There was a long silence. Then she answered. Dad made a mistake. As it turned out, my father had approved several massive real estate investments during a period of market growth. Everyone believed property values would continue rising. Instead, the market turned. Hard. Projects lost value. Investors demanded answers. Banks wanted repayment. Millions of dollars suddenly became liabilities. The family business began bleeding money. Fast. At first, they believed the situation was temporary. Then it became worse. Much worse. One failed investment became 3. 3 became 6. Lawsuits followed. Partners withdrew. Loans piled up. Within a year, the company that had taken decades to build was fighting for survival. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in my father's eyes. Real fear. The kind that keeps people awake at night. The kind that follows them everywhere. The kind money can't solve. Family gatherings became completely different. The confidence was gone. The arrogance was gone. The constant bragging disappeared. Instead, conversations revolved around debt. Financial restructuring. Asset sales. Emergency meetings. And bankruptcy. A word my family had never imagined applying to themselves. One evening, my mother called unexpectedly. She sounded older. Weaker. "Can we meet?" I agreed. The next afternoon, we sat together in a quiet cafe. For several minutes, she avoided eye contact. Then she finally spoke. "The business is in trouble." I already knew. But hearing her admit it felt strange. For years, she had acted as though failure only happened to other people. Now it was happening to her. To all of them. She sighed deeply. "We may lose everything." I wanted to feel satisfaction. After all, these were the same people who had mocked Daniel for years. The same people who excluded us. The same people who treated him like an embarrassment. But I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt sadness. Because pride had blinded them. And now they were paying the price. Then something unexpected happened. A few weeks later, my brother called. For the first time in nearly 10 years, he sounded respectful. Actually respectful. "Emma." His voice was hesitant. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." There was another pause. Then he asked the question that changed everything. "How successful is Daniel's company?" I nearly dropped my phone. For years, nobody in my family had shown the slightest interest in Daniel's business. Now suddenly they wanted details. That could only mean one thing. They were desperate. Word had finally reached them. Someone had told them about Harper Farms. The contracts. The exports. The distribution network. The millions in revenue. The company value. The success. The hidden empire. For years, they had laughed at the farmer. Now they were discovering that the farmer had become one of the wealthiest entrepreneurs they knew. And they couldn't believe it. Over the following weeks, more phone calls arrived. More questions. More curiosity. More respect than Daniel had received in the previous 7 years combined. It was almost unbelievable. The people who once mocked him for growing tomatoes suddenly wanted to discuss business strategies. The people who once ignored him now wanted meetings. The people who once called him the family embarrassment were now speaking about him with admiration. But Daniel saw through it immediately. One evening, I told him everything. The calls. The questions. The sudden interest. Daniel listened quietly. Then he smiled. Not proudly. Not bitterly. Simply knowingly. They finally found out. I nodded. Yes. He looked out the window toward the endless rows of greenhouses. Then he said something that sent a chill through me. "They don't care about me, Emma." I already knew he was right. He continued. "They care about what they think I can do for them." And soon enough, we would discover exactly how much they needed him. Because my family's financial problems weren't ending. They were getting worse. And before long, they would come asking Daniel for something they never imagined they would need from a tomato farmer. $3 million. The phone calls started becoming more frequent. At first, it was my brother. Then my sister. Then distant relatives who hadn't spoken to us in years. Suddenly, everyone seemed interested in Daniel. Everyone wanted to know how the business was doing. Everyone wanted to hear about Harper Farms. Everyone wanted to be friendly. The change was almost unbelievable. For 7 years, Daniel had been invisible to them. Now he was the most important person in the family. One evening, I sat in Daniel's office as we reviewed contracts. My phone buzzed. It was my mother. I looked at Daniel. He already knew who it was. "Answer it," he said. I did. Her voice sounded unusually warm. Almost rehearsed. "Hi, sweetheart. I hadn't heard that tone in years. Not since before I married Daniel. After a few minutes of awkward small talk, she finally got to the point. Your father and I were wondering if we could visit. I immediately knew why. And judging by Daniel's expression, so did he. The following Saturday, my parents arrived. For the first time ever, they seemed nervous. Very nervous. As they stepped out of their luxury SUV, I noticed something strange. My father wasn't carrying his usual confidence. My mother wasn't carrying her usual arrogance. Instead, they looked worried. Almost desperate. Daniel greeted them politely. As always. He offered coffee. Showed them around the office. Treated them with more respect than they had ever shown him. For a while, the conversation remained superficial. The weather. The farm. Business growth. Recent events. Nobody mentioned the real reason for the visit. Until my father finally cleared his throat. Daniel. The room became quiet. We need your help. There it was. The sentence everyone had been avoiding. Daniel remained calm. What kind of help? My father exchanged a glance with my mother. Then he took a deep breath. The company is running out of options. For the next 20 minutes, they explained everything. The failed investments. The lawsuits. The debt. The losses. The banks. The pressure. The possibility of bankruptcy. I listened quietly. Although I already knew most of it. Then came the number. The number that seemed to suck all the air from the room. $3 million. That was how much they needed. $3 million. Not to expand. Not to grow. To survive. To keep the business alive. To avoid financial collapse. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then my mother leaned forward. Her smile looked forced. Daniel, you've built something incredible. I almost laughed. For 7 years she couldn't say a single positive thing about him. Now suddenly he was incredible. My brother joined in. You've always been a smart businessman. Again, I was stunned. This was the same brother who used to joke about fancy tomato houses. The same man who laughed every time Daniel mentioned farming. Now he sounded like Daniel's biggest admirer. My sister wasn't much different. She praised his vision. His leadership. His success. The compliments kept coming. One after another. The performance was almost painful to watch. Because that's exactly what it was. A performance. Daniel noticed it too. But he never reacted. Never interrupted. Never embarrassed them. He simply listened. The entire time. Eventually, my father leaned forward. Daniel. His voice cracked slightly. We need a $3 million investment. There it was. The real reason they were here. Not family. Not reconciliation. Not regret. Money. $3 million. I looked around the room. At my parents. My siblings. The people who spent 7 years treating Daniel like an embarrassment. And suddenly everything became clear. Their behavior had changed. But their hearts hadn't. They weren't here because they respected him. They were here because they needed him. The moment I realized that, something inside me shifted. For years, I had hoped my family would finally appreciate Daniel. Now I understood the truth. They still didn't. They simply needed access to his success. Daniel remained silent for several moments. Then he smiled politely. The same calm smile he always wore. The smile that revealed absolutely nothing. I appreciate your honesty, he said. Everyone immediately looked relieved. Hopeful. Excited. As if they believed the problem was already solved. But Daniel wasn't finished. He glanced toward me. Then back toward my family. And for the first time all afternoon, I saw something different in his eyes. Not anger. Not revenge. Just clarity. The kind of clarity that comes from remembering exactly how people treated you when you had nothing. What my family didn't realize was that Daniel had already made a decision. And very soon, at my mother's 60th birthday party, they would discover exactly what that decision was. A decision that would leave an entire room speechless. 2 weeks after my family's visit, my mother's 60th birthday arrived. It wasn't going to be a simple family gathering. Nothing in my family was ever simple. The event was held at one of the most expensive hotels in the city. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Live musicians played soft music near the stage. Elegant decorations filled the ballroom. More than 200 guests attended. Business partners. Friends. Relatives. Former colleagues. People my parents had spent years trying to impress. As Daniel and I entered the ballroom, I immediately felt the tension. Something was different. People kept looking at us. Whispering. Watching. For years, we had been the family members nobody paid attention to. Now we were the center of attention. And everyone knew why. The rumors had spread quickly. The struggling real estate company. The massive debt. The possible bankruptcy. The wealthy farmer. The $3 million request. Nobody said it openly. But everyone was thinking the same thing. Would Daniel save the family? My mother greeted us with an unusually warm smile. She hugged me. Then she hugged Daniel. A gesture that would have been unthinkable just a few years earlier. "Thank you for coming," she said. Daniel smiled politely. "Happy birthday." As the evening continued, I noticed something strange. My family barely talked about the birthday. Instead, every conversation somehow drifted toward business. Toward investments. Toward opportunities. Toward Daniel. My brother stayed unusually close to us. My sister constantly complimented Daniel's achievements. Even distant relatives suddenly acted as though they had always admired him. The entire situation felt artificial. Like everyone was following the same script. A script designed to make Daniel feel appreciated. A script written 7 years too late. Throughout dinner, people kept asking Daniel questions. How had he built Harper Farms? How many employees did he have? How many countries did he export to? What was the company worth? The same people who once laughed at his profession now treated him like a celebrity. Daniel answered politely. But briefly. Never bragging. Never showing off. Never mentioning the years of humiliation. That silence made me admire him even more. By the time dessert arrived, the atmosphere had changed. The room had become noticeably quieter. People were waiting. Everyone knew the birthday speeches were about to begin. And everyone suspected something important would happen. My father looked nervous. My brother kept checking his phone. My mother smiled constantly, but the anxiety in her eyes was impossible to hide. Finally, the master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage. The room fell silent. A short speech followed. Then another. Guests shared stories. Family members offered birthday wishes. Applause filled the ballroom. Then my mother stood up. The room instantly became quiet. She thanked everyone for attending. She spoke about family. About relationships. About overcoming challenges. Several times, she glanced toward Daniel. As if preparing for something. As if waiting for a particular moment. Then she invited me to say a few words. The moment I stood up, I felt hundreds of eyes watching. The room became completely silent. I looked around. At my parents. At my siblings. At the relatives who had mocked Daniel for years. At the guests who had heard countless jokes about the tomato farmer. And suddenly I realized something. Everyone expected the same ending. They believed Daniel was about to rescue the family. They believed the $3 million was already on its way. They believed tonight would end with applause and celebration. Nobody was talking. Nobody was eating. Nobody was moving. The entire ballroom seemed frozen. Waiting. Expecting. Hoping. Beside me, Daniel remained calm. Exactly as he always had. He didn't look angry. He didn't look resentful. He didn't look interested in revenge. But he also didn't look like a man preparing to write a $3 million check. For years, my family had mistaken kindness for weakness. Tonight, they were about to learn the difference. I took a slow breath and stepped closer to the microphone. The room became so quiet that you could hear a glass being set down across the ballroom. Every eye remained fixed on me. Waiting for my answer. Waiting to discover whether the family embarrassment would save the family that had spent 7 years humiliating him. And in just a few seconds, everything would change. For a moment, nobody moved. The ballroom was completely silent. Hundreds of eyes remained fixed on me. Waiting. Expecting. Hoping. My mother sat at the center table, forcing a smile. My father looked nervous. My brother and sister watched me carefully. They all believed they knew what was about to happen. After all, Daniel could solve their problems with a single signature. $3 million. One check. One decision. One rescue. But they still didn't understand something. This was never about money. It was about respect. And respect cannot be borrowed when you suddenly need it. I took a deep breath and looked around the room. For the first time in years, nobody interrupted me. Nobody laughed. Nobody rolled their eyes. Nobody made a joke about tomatoes. The people who had spent years talking down to us were finally listening. I stepped closer to the microphone. Then I spoke. Slowly. Clearly. Calmly. The farmer you mocked owes you nothing. 8 words. That was all. No anger. No shouting. No insults. Just the truth. The effect was immediate. The entire room froze. My mother's smile disappeared. My father's face turned pale. My brother stared at the floor. My sister looked away. Nobody knew what to say. Because deep down, everyone knew those words were deserved. For 7 years, they had treated Daniel like an embarrassment. For 7 years, they excluded him from family events. For 7 years, they laughed at his profession. And now, when they needed help, they expected him to forget everything. Daniel slowly stood beside me. The room watched him carefully. Waiting to see if he would retaliate. Waiting to see if he would humiliate them the way they had humiliated him. But Daniel wasn't that kind of man. He never had been. He looked toward my parents. Then toward my siblings. His voice was calm. Just as it had always been. I don't hate any of you. Nobody spoke. I don't want revenge. The silence grew even heavier. I sincerely hope your family finds a way through this. My mother looked hopeful for a moment. As if she thought a check might still be coming. Then Daniel finished. But I won't be investing $3 million. The hope vanished instantly. No yelling followed. No dramatic confrontation. No revenge speech. Just quiet reality. For the first time, my family had to face the consequences of their own choices. Daniel wasn't punishing them. He simply wasn't rescuing them. There is a difference. My father lowered his head. My mother wiped tears from her eyes. Not because they had lost $3 million. Because they had finally realized what they had truly lost. They had lost the trust of a good man. A man who had shown them respect when they showed him none. A man who had remained humble while becoming successful. A man who never measured people by status, wealth, or profession. A man they had judged without ever trying to know. The painful truth settled over the room. Daniel had never been the family embarrassment. He had been the family's greatest example of character. And they had failed to see it. As Daniel and I walked toward the exit, nobody stopped us. Nobody argued. Nobody protested. The ballroom remained silent. The same people who once laughed at the tomato farmer now sat speechless. Outside, the night air felt cool and peaceful. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I looked at Daniel. "Do you regret it?" He smiled. The same quiet smile I had fallen in love with years earlier. "No." I squeezed his hand. "Neither did I. Because some lessons are expensive. And some opportunities never return." As we drove away, I realized something important. Success hadn't changed Daniel. Success had simply revealed who he had always been. And my family finally understood what they should have known from the beginning. Never judge a person's worth by their profession. The people you look down on today may be the very people you depend on tomorrow. The greatest wealth isn't money. It's character. And character is something money can never buy.